Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us this week on Market Journal. I'm Bryce Duskett, joining you from downtown Lincoln. Blue corduroy jackets have taken over the capital city as the Nebraska FFA celebrates the 94th annual state convention. The Nebraska FFA has grown now to include more than 200 chapters across the state and 11,000 plus members. Thousands of those members and supporters came to Lincoln for this year's convention. We have a full show lined up for you today, including grain and livestock market analysis. But first, we will learn more about the State FFA Association. Stacey Agnew is the executive director of the Nebraska FFA Foundation. The foundation works to enhance quality education and FFA programs by partnering with businesses and organizations to support the FFA. We had the chance to visit with Stacey here at the convention and began by discussing the growth we've seen in agricultural education statewide. Stacey, I want to ask you about the tremendous growth we've seen in the Nebraska FFA Association. What do you attribute a lot of that interest in ag education to?
I completely attribute it to local communities really being interested in having young people come back to those communities for jobs all across Nebraska, whether it's rural or urban. That is one of the main reasons why I believe that we've had that huge increase in the last 10 years is communities see, hey, if we're not teaching kids about jobs in ag, why would they come back? So I think people are getting it now. And so that's why we're having more ag ed and FFA programs across the state.
Well, there's a lot of excitement here in Lincoln this week. A lot of different things that are going on. Let's head on just some of the high level. Of course, we've got competitions. We've got a lot of different industry groups here as well. What are some of the highlights you want to share with us about the activities?
Well, going on all 3 days is going to be competitive events. So there's students across the state that have competed at a local and district level of competitive events. There's career development events, proficiency award interviews, there's leadership development events. There's probably over 100 different events that students have qualified for that are competing in, and then they'll also be recognized at some point here during the 3 days of convention.
One of the neat things, and people can see it behind us, there's a lot of industry groups and different colleges here talking to students as well. Talk about the importance of that.
You know, it's all about creating career connections. With the foundation, we want to make sure that students have opportunities to engage with industry partners, to learn about different educational opportunities, and if anything, just put a name with a face with what a company or an organization is. So what we have going on is there are 80 different industry partners. Today, on Wednesday and Thursday, we're going to have this is the FFA Expo going on right now, where we have organizations, membership organizations in agriculture, and then we also have lots of colleges that have ag programs that would love to have FFA members come to their college. And then on Friday, that will completely change, and we'll have 40 industry partners that will be here talking about jobs and internships that are available to FFA members now or when they graduate from high school or even college and post-college opportunities.
And Stacey, the convention is only 3 days, happens very quick here in Lincoln, but the work of the foundation truly happens year-round. What are one or two of the biggest projects that the foundation does throughout the year that our viewers should be familiar with?
Well, the I Believe in the Future of Ag campaign is a wonderful campaign. It's a great way for local donors to support their local FFA chapter by making a tax-deductible contribution through the foundation. This last year, there was over $300,000 that were raised for local FFA programs through the I Believe in the Future of Ag campaign, and we have matching dollars from our corporate partners. So every FFA chapter gets more than 100% back of a donation that a local donor makes. Convention, we help to invest a lot of money in what happens here at Pinnacle Bank Arena, the awards, the competitive events, all of those we help underwrite the cost of those programs for FFA. So convention is a very small fee for an FFA member to attend, so that's really exciting. We want to make it affordable for them, and so that's what we help do.
It's a busy week. Appreciate you joining us. What's the website if somebody wants to learn more?
Yes, www.neffafoundation.org.
Stacey, thank you for your time.
Yes, thanks.
Thanks to Stacey for taking the time to give us a better understanding of the convention as well as the educational opportunities afforded to the future farmers of America. Shifting our focus over to the grain markets now, we had the chance to catch up with Jeff Peterson, who's the president of Heartland Farm Partners. Jeff was kind enough to join us down here at the FFA Convention on Wednesday afternoon. The month of April brings a new sense of optimism as planters get dusted off, but in the markets, it's much of the same story from the last month. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, inflation, and the prospect of tight supplies continue to drive this volatile market. We began the conversation with Jeff by talking about some of the latest news impacting the markets. Joining us now is Jeff Peterson of Heartland Farm Partners. Jeff, great to have you on Market Journal.
Oh, it's always fun, especially in this atmosphere. It's cool to be around all the FFA students again.
Here at the Nebraska FFA State Convention. Let's talk about these markets in the grain complex, Jeff. It seems like there's been a lot of bullish news lately to support the markets. What's been the most bullish piece of news you've seen?
So I think the biggest thing right now gets to be back to the Russia going ahead and having a war with Ukraine. And basically the whole piece of that we're focused on is how many acres are physically going to get planted, because the whole unknown there is that how long it's going to drag out, how many acres are not going to get planted. So that's the biggest piece, Bryce, that I see.
Let's take a look back to last week. U.S. Department of Agriculture had a few reports that made the headlines as we're about a week past that. What's lingering in your mind about the most important information or the most interesting piece of information that came out from that?
Well, I think there's a couple pieces that we definitely will focus on. Let's start first with the Planning Intentions Report. And, it was a surprise coming in at about 3.9 million acres less than what we had last year on the corn side. We were kind of thinking as basically as our group about 2 million acres less. So that lower corn number definitely came in and surprised us. And then on the flip side of that, we didn't think all the acres that they physically took out of corn and reduced their number would end up over on the soybean side. So for us, it would be those acres numbers. A couple comments on that, I think, is as we go forward, I think more of that corn number is going to be focused on what the weather's like. And we're getting off to a decent start here on planting. About 2% planted is where it's at, but it's not a record pace. And we've got Minnesota up there that's actually picking up probably some wetter and colder conditions than normal. So I think ultimately that corn number down the road is really going to be focused on how quickly this crop goes in. We think that's probably the smallest corn number that's put out there. We also think that's probably the biggest soybean acre number that's put out there this year.
Jeff, you mentioned the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's been interesting to follow along with that as it comes to the producers there. There shows that at least some of the pictures I've seen, they are going ahead with planting if they can access their fields. What have you heard on the ground there? Any updates you can share with our viewers?
Yeah, so some numbers that we ended up seeing here this morning, and this would be as of April 4th, would show that they're about 4.9% planted. So to put that in perspective, Bryce, that means they've got about 2 million acres that they've got planted. So we went back and took a look, where were they last year at this time? That would be about 89% of where they were last year. So they're lagging about 10% right now. Now what's going to get interesting is that we know everybody's kind of talking, there's probably enough fuel out there to do about 20% of their crop. So we know that ultimately first 20% should go okay. What we don't know is how planting is going to go after that. So we're going to have to continue to watch that close.
Obviously some big question marks there when it comes to if they're able to get their crop in the ground. When it comes to the crop that they grew last year that's currently in storage, have you heard any updates when it comes to shipping, be it barge or by rail?
Yeah, so what we're hearing right now is nothing's moving out of the port, so the shipping traffic is shut down. And just to put that back in perspective, that's normally where they sent out over 95% of what their shipments were. But they are moving some stuff west by rail. And for the month of March, we show that they'd have probably moved out somewhere between 36 and 40 million bushels. Now that may seem like quite a bit, but in comparison to what they should be moving out, they probably should be moving out many multiples of that. And part of the challenge they do run into is that they're using a different gauge on rail, so as they physically get to the borders, as they come over to Europe, then ultimately everything has to be offloaded into other trains to go ahead and make its way on over into Europe.
Jeff, back here we've got things we're watching. You mentioned planting, the global issues as well, but what else is catching your attention with the market trade right now?
Yeah, so I think for us right now, we're watching very closely planting progress. Right with that, though, we're watching the weather. We're watching how is things progressing out there. That drought monitor still shows some really big dryness in Nebraska across probably kind of that middle, call it 90% of Iowa, But we're actually seeing a little bit of improvement up there in Minnesota. Eastern part of South Dakota is a little better. Eastern part of North Dakota is a little better. So we're watching those areas. We want to see ultimately how planting goes, because we want to watch out for not only the pace, but we want to get a feel of also what we're seeing out there for those prevent plant areas that can't quite get all their acres in. So that's the biggest thing, and we're going to be watching that planting progress really close going forward, and then ultimately see what kind of emergence we get, because we're actually hearing some areas in south central Nebraska, Bryce, that are actually doing a little irrigating just because conditions are so dry, or to get the soil in condition to be able to go ahead and plant.
Real quick, Jeff, I want to get to a producer question. Had a producer reach out to me asking, realizing that as we have this conversation today, soybeans closer to $16 than they are $17. He was curious your thoughts on if we could see a market take a run at that $17 figure again.
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, overall, there's still a tightness out there in the veg oils. The other thing we have to kind of keep in mind is that this South American crop is smaller than what it physically would have been a year ago on the soybean side. So they're going to physically go ahead and run out of beans quicker. We're starting to see a little bit of an upkick in our exports on the inspection side and also on the export sales side. So I think we can have another run at that level.
Thank you to Jeff for taking the time out of his day to join us here at the FFA Convention. Shifting our focus over to the livestock markets now, we're focusing this week on the hog market. Lee Schulz, Iowa State Extension livestock economist, joined us earlier in the week. The USDA's March 1st quarterly hogs and pigs report shows inventory down 2.3% from the year prior. We began the discussion with Lee by getting his take on that report.
I think the headline coming out of the report is we're in contractionary mode. This was a rather bullish report. All estimates but one came in below pre-report expectations. They came below year-ago levels and suggest not just this summer we're going to have lower supplies, but that's going to really go throughout the year, that we're going to have year-over-year lower supplies. And so continuing the trend we've seen over the last several quarters of looking at that hog and pigs report. You know, some of the big surprises to me, I think you have to look at the breeding herd. Breeding herd was down 1.9% compared to a year ago levels. That really shows that we're not just short-term lower levels, but we're looking at longer-term lower levels, because that breeding herd is really dictating the trajectory of those supplies. You know, that's leading to lower pig crops, which are giving us these lower market hog inventory numbers. Really, the larger hog inventory numbers are ones much lower than a year ago. So as we look at lower slaughter numbers, that's going to very much be the first half of the year. And then we'll start to see closer year-over-year changes as we get later into the year. But overall, we're looking at slaughter down probably about 2.5% on average in 2022.
Lee, you're talking about lower slaughter as well as lower breeding as well. What does that tell you about the long-term trajectory, at least here in the short term, about the pork market here in the U.S.?
Well, with tighter supplies, that's given us stronger prices, and really that's been what's at the heart of this rally. Since really the start of the year, we've seen stronger prices. You know, we've seen levels really peak as we got into late March or so. Now we've really seen the market fall off over the last week. It's kind of surprising, because as you look at the hog and pigs numbers and how bullish they were, you ask why are we kind of bearish in this last week? Well, I think what you're seeing is concerns over international exports of poultry, and with high-path avian influenza, do we start seeing some short-term bans? Does that provide more meat domestically here in the short term and pressure those prices down across the board for competing meats? And so I think that's what we're kind of pairing, that short-term pressure on the market with the long-term bullishness that we've really felt since the beginning of the year.
Let's also talk about the price of feed. That's got to be a factor weighing on the producers' minds as well, isn't it, Lee?
That's huge. I don't think we can underscore that impact. If you look at our cost of production compared to 2020, we're about 50% higher. A big part of that's feed, as we've seen feed grain and oilseed prices skyrocket, but also you have to look at a lot of those non-feed variable costs. So the factors that have really just followed with that 2 to 3% inflationary increases really over the last decade, we're seeing some double-digit increases in some of those other costs that are a lot of times more sticky, and so that's giving us much higher cost of production. We're looking at cost of production levels that are probably going to beat the records that we've seen in 2013. We're looking at, our estimates are about $95 per hundredweight on average for cost of production. I'll pair that against what we're seeing as prices. Our average annual price forecast is about $100 per hundredweight. That is just below the record we've seen in 2014. The difference between 2014 and 2022, though, is the cost of production. So we've seen record profits in 2014 driven by those higher prices and moderate costs. Compare that to today with high prices, but also those record high costs. So we're looking at just modest profits for hog production in 2022.
When it comes to demand, you kind of alluded to it earlier, there is pretty good demand out there for pork though, right?
There is, but you got to look at what is driving that demand. So as we're seeing tighter supplies, lower production, we're seeing per capita consumption decline, but the prices have offset that lower consumption. And so that's really what's driving our demand picture, both domestically and on the export market. And it's something, as we look at the hog and pigs numbers, the slaughter levels, and what we're projecting for production is going to be a trend moving forward. So it's how long can we see these higher prices maintain that demand profile as you see that lower consumption take place.
Next week, we'll be joined by Central Valley Ag's Luke Beckman for a look at the markets. Remember, if you have any questions you'd like for me to ask him, you can get in touch with us on social media or email us, and we'll be sure to pass that question along. Over the past few decades, it seems that consumers are more and more disconnected from the farm and ranch. But since 1990, the Nebraska Farm Bureau Foundation has been working hard to bridge those gaps one letter and one classroom at a time. Thanks to the Ag Pen Pals program, farmers and ranchers are paired with urban classroom students across the state, sharing through letters, Zoom calls, and even personal visits their knowledge and experiences about how and why farmers do what they do. You can learn more about this important program in the March issue of the Nebraska Farmer. Well, it is now time for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Well, Al, we got a bit of precipitation this week, at least here on the eastern end of the state. How are things looking as we inch closer to planting?
Well, Bryce, we've seen some pretty wild weather there this last week. We were warm at the beginning, and then we turned colder as that low pressure system moved across the northern plains. Brought some very strong winds to a large portion of the central and northern plains. We had wind gusts reported, at least up from our mesonet sites, over 60 miles per hour in portions of western Nebraska. We got into yesterday in eastern Nebraska, we've seen wind gusts that were in excess of 45 miles per hour into the 50 mile per hour range. So very windy conditions as that intense low pressure system slowly worked its way across the Great Lakes. Now we are going to see a little bit of a warming trend as we go through this week into the early part of next week. But yeah, we have another decent system to move through the central Rockies, and that will probably bring our wind speeds up and give us at least a chance for some accumulating snowfall, particularly across the northwestern one-third of the state. So we go to the upper air models. The first thing I'll draw your attention to is that a high pressure system or upper air ridge is building into the region. That's going to bring warm southerly flow up from the Gulf of Mexico, increase our humidity levels, but also increase our temperature. So we'll be looking at widespread 60s to low 70s across the southern part of the state. Low pressure up into south central South Dakota really has no moisture to pull into the system. So most of the moisture that we see on this map is associated with a trough that's coming in the Pacific Northwest that is expected to start to carve out a fairly broad trough across the western United States as we go into Sunday. Low pressure develops in the Texas Panhandle. That will start to at least bring some moisture up, and we may see some of that result in some scattered rain shower activity across the northwestern one-third of the state. By Monday, that trough really starts to move down the coast of West Coast, and we see a low pressure system developing over portions of eastern Nevada. Basically, most of the moisture will remain confined to the northern Rockies and to the west. We do see a little bit of precipitation to the southeast of us, but more importantly, on Tuesday, the system starts to really strengthen. And with that, with low pressure at the surface in southeastern Colorado, we should start to see some moisture moving to the north, and then eventually wrapping around and giving us some decent snowfall in the central Rockies, perhaps even farther south if the system digs a little bit deeper and is a little bit slower. By the time we get to Wednesday, that energy starts to eject out over eastern Nebraska. The first low pressure system moves up into Wisconsin, and a secondary low pressure system starts developing over northern portions of New Mexico. This will allow good moisture wrap around from the upper air low and some decent snowfall across the Dakotas. Once again, if this comes a little bit farther south, we'll see more of that accumulating snowfall across northwestern Nebraska. High pressure starts to build in on Thursday from the north, and that's going to bring that cooler air into our region. So the warm air will start to shift to our east. We'll see thunderstorm activity from Oklahoma all the way up through Missouri. And by the time we get to Friday, this upper air trough itself starts to move over into southeastern portions of Iowa. Low pressure at the surface over the Ohio River Valley means a broad area of pretty big significant precipitation, and on the backside of it, accumulating snowfall possible for eastern Kansas, Missouri, and southeastern portions of Iowa, a little bit farther northward, and all of a sudden we start to deal with some of that issues here in southeastern Nebraska. So pay attention to the updates. There's likely to be some changes. This does look like a significant storm system is going to develop. As we look even farther into the future, this is the 8 to 14 day forecast from next Thursday to the following Tuesday. And as that low pressure is out to the east, we get the cold air on the backside of it, so we're going to stay in below normal territory for pretty much most of the week into early next weekend. And in terms of precipitation, even though this has shown a drier trend, the models are starting to show some chances of another storm system developing as we get into later next weekend. So this may be overblown in terms of dryness. We'll just have to pay attention. This is the time of the year when a lot of things change rather rapidly and storm systems can develop on a minute's notice almost to speak. So pay attention to these updates because we're most likely going to see some significant weather develop as we get into the next week.
Thank you, Al. Finally today, the latest USDA prospective plantings report showed an estimated 89.5 million acres of corn will be planted, along with a presumed record of 91 million acres of planted acres for soybeans this year. In order to get all those acres planted efficiently, you want to make sure your planter is ready to roll when the time is right. We had the opportunity to catch up with Dave Panko of Panko Ag Solutions to get some pointers on getting your machines up to speed. Bill Dodd brings us this story.
Having your planter in top condition is important for many producers. This is particularly true for producers utilizing reduced and no-till operations. In short, a well-maintained planter will give seeds their best chance to flourish throughout the growing season. A majority of the physical responsibilities for pushing soil, placing seed, and getting things off on the right foot rests squarely on the shoulders of the planter. Making sure this piece of equipment is in top working order will give you the best possible start for achieving maximum yield performance.
Really, for any row crop farmer, in my opinion, the planter is their most valuable piece of equipment. The biggest impact on any crop is largely determined by the planter and the performance of that planter. We need to have seeds placed accurately and provide an even emergence of that crop to gain the highest yield. Keeping proper maintenance on your planter is probably very, very undervalued. In my opinion, growers need to take the time to understand what proper maintenance is on each component of their planter. Out in front of the row unit itself, you're going to have your row cleaner that's going to clear out any residue, root ball that you have in the way or dirt to provide a clean surface for the planter row unit behind it. So then behind that you have a true V disc that's going to form a furrow for that seed to drop in, and the depth of that true V disc is going to be determined by a gauge wheel that is right next to those discs. And up above, at the same time when this furrow is forming, you're going to have a meter that is singulating and dropping the seed as accurate as possible, and that seed is falling down through a seed tube and placed in the bottom of the seed trench. And behind that, you can be, as some guys, if they choose to do so, would drop fertilizer in the seed trench. And then behind that, you would have some sort of closing wheel or closing system that's going to close that seed trench up.
With so much happening in one fell swoop, it's easy to understand why proper maintenance is so crucial to your operation. One of the first things your planter does is clear debris and move soil with the row cleaners. This will be a good place to start, as you may run into problems including yield loss without proper maintenance of this component.
Most likely you're going to either clean too much or not enough residue or dirt ahead of your row unit, which is going to cause uneven emergence or possibly leave seeds on top of the ground, and you would cause basically a loss in yield potential. For most row cleaners, you're going to have a linkage or an arm for a floating row cleaner, that is, and you need to check that linkage as well as the bearings that on the wheels themselves. Those need to be serviced every year, and if you do have a fixed row cleaner, you also want to check those bearings on those wheels as well and make sure that they are properly maintained.
Next on the agenda will be to check your V-disc or opener. This component is responsible for opening a consistent furrow and placing seed at a consistent depth. Your biggest concern with this particular part will be the diameter of the disc and the functionality of the gauge wheels.
So with any true V-disc or any opener, the first place we start is a diameter of the disc. The OEM manufacturers are going to have specs of when those need to be replaced. For a John Deere planter, brand new, those discs are 15 inches, and at a 14.5 inches or less, those discs need to be replaced. For a Case IH planter, brand new, those are 14 inches, and at 13.5 inches, those discs need to be replaced. But any of those specs you can find from an OEM dealer, especially properly shimming those discs. So that's the gauge wheels are lined up to the true V disc, and those need to be properly shimmed so that they press against the true V and provide a good depth gauge.
Farm machinery is an investment. As such, you'll want to achieve the best return possible on that investment. Failing to get a proper start in the best possible seed bed, crops will ultimately be challenged from the onset to grow to their full potential. With proper maintenance and some fine-tuning, your planter should get your growing season started on the right foot. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks for the story, Bill. If you'd like more tips and insight on getting prepared for the upcoming planting and growing season, stay up to date with the latest information online at cropwatch.unl.edu. Well, that is going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to follow us on YouTube and on social media to join in on the conversation. We hope to see you back here next time. Until then, I'm Bryce Duskett. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.